This is Beyond the Byte with Joe and Abe, a cybersecurity conversation. In each episode, we get to know someone and discuss their journey, how they got here, and what they learned along the way. Through these conversations, we at Greylog hope to better understand what it means to be a good citizen within our community and continue our evolution as a cybersecurity solution provider. This conversation is sponsored by Greylog, an award-winning provider of SIM and log management solutions. I'm Randy, the producer of this podcast, and here are your hosts, Joe and Abe.
Morning, everyone. All right, Joe. What's your definition of cheating?
Cheating. Oh, wow.
Wow.
All right.
Did not see this coming.
So, all right. Let me rephrase just slightly. And so, as many know, I do teach at a community college, and I have a lot of fun doing that. And what's fun is this semester I'm teaching scripting. I'm teaching some fundamentals, PowerShell, Python, that kind of stuff, and having fun with it. What's interesting is a lot of academic institutions haven't caught up to things like ChatGPT, but even that one's pretty easy. It's pretty easy to kind of filter out who's working and who's not on that one. But things like GitHub Copilot and actual good autocoders, is that part of the modern world today for coding? Is it tuning an autocoder is part of building good code? Or is it, no, you have to learn the fundamentals? At what point are we a network infrastructure engineer staring at the cloud going, where do I fit in this? Right. And, it just came up again today where it's, hey, here's an assignment that was entirely done in ChatGPT. Are they cheating?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think it also goes back to the idea of like, is something you produce in ChatGPT, is the output of that yours, or is it OpenAI's, or is it public domain? Right. Like if you engineered the prompt, then do you own it? Right. Like I do think that this lends itself to a more fundamental question around education, which is the speed at which education adapts is far behind the speed at which the world is adapting around us. I mean, when I went to school, like you weren't allowed to have a water bottle on your desk or eat in class and things like that. And my kids now can do those things, but that's just happened within like the last 2 years. Like you're telling me like hydration, we just recognized that hydration's a necessity within the last 2 years. I think we're all like talking about ChatGPT. We're almost like, we're so far out of that from an education perspective. And not only that, but then you get into a funding conversation of how do you train teachers and how do you train these people to actually identify these things if you're going to call it cheating, right? You have to apply it. Just because Abe's way better at AI than I am, he'd get caught way less frequently than I did. Right? It's hard to say, is that cheating or not? Because I think we have yet as a society to determine if it's cheating or not to use even something like as basic as like an autopilot on a car or something like that, right? Is that cheating on a road trip? So I'm going to answer your question by 100% not answering it and avoiding it by just pointing out all the pitfalls.
No, and that's totally fair. And I'm actually really excited to see how some of it unravels. And it's just going to be some interesting conversations. So the first AI assisted medical procedure, right, where someone does something AI generated to a body and it falls apart, horrifically, whatever the case may be, right? Something where there's liability, where there's pain on the other end of it. The first AI generated scenario of CISO level guidance that leads directly tangibly to a breach, right? It's, how's that going to unfold? It all reminds me, honestly, though, of a laughing thing in the 90s of the late early .com was when MP3s were fairly new, and then legitimate MP3s finally came out. So you could buy an MP3 from a store or from iTunes or whatever. And so a bunch of absolute poop disturbers went and bought MP3s and then listed them on eBay just to watch a bunch of legal heads explode, right? Like I bought this MP3. I'm selling a used MP3 on eBay, and that led to like a whole. Go Google it. That's a thing that turned into a thing. So, anyways, talking about education in the future and all that, I think that's where we are now. So, joining us is Ali. This is your part.
This is my part?
No,
sorry.
Don't.
I'm pointing at my screen.
Yeah.
My bad. Randy's part.
That's all right. I was so enthralled by the conversation you guys were having. I realized I forgot to start the timers, forgot to sequence the the pieces of the show. So I'm just here being the number one fan of Joe and Abe taking it all
Oh yeah, we have
in.
a guest. Oh yeah,
So,
we have a guest.
yeah. Oh, wait, I'm on this podcast. So without further ado, very excited to have one of my friends on this podcast, Ali Abbas. Yeah, really interested to see what he has to say and how we're going to dig into his journey today. Ali has over 15 years experience in developing and leading teams in various stages of the IT development lifecycle. He spearheaded the growth up in Durham College with their Cybersecurity Innovation Center, along with their AI and cybersecurity labs. He held senior roles at Orion, and most recently, Ali was retained to lead the cyber training division of the Youth Employment Services in Ontario. Ali Abbas, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. It is indeed a pleasure to be in the company of good friends, but more importantly, people that get me to think, because that's something we don't do a lot of these days in society. So, you know what? I'm happy to be here to think and for once, not be the host and just answer a couple of questions and have some fun. So, the pressure's on you folks.
Yeah.
If I don't understand a question, I'm just going to say, yo, I don't get what you're saying. So, next. Move on.
And to be honest, I've got total performance anxiety being a host in front of you, Ali, since I've been on a few of your programs and you just do such a fantastic job. And
I feel
that's,
like
that's all the kissing up I'm going to do.
although I do feel like I have a goal now, which is to ask you a question that's so convoluted that you're just like, no, sorry, I'm not answering that. Which is the antithesis of usually what my goal is in this podcast. But
I have a kill switch for those difficult questions. That's the problem with doing this online, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I lost power. I can't hear you. And the conversation ends there. So I came prepared, my friend. I know I'm
Perfect.
in the company of some pretty evil geniuses. So I know what I got to do. I have a way out.
Awesome. Speaking of evil geniuses, there is a question that we ask all of our guests at the beginning. Given that we all work for a SIM vendor and this podcast is sponsored by a SIM vendor and by all of us, I mean, everyone but Ali, everyone but the guest work for a SIM vendor. Why, in your own words, your own thoughts, does SIM suck? And we know it does. So you don't have to change. You don't have to pretend like it doesn't.
Yeah, I could hear that question differently to say, why do we suck? No, you guys don't suck. You're good people. Look, I'll give you my 2 rupees of thought, Randy. You've heard me provide these before for free. The first reason, cost. I think cost becomes one of the major things which comes in front of me and go, this sucks. And I'll tell you why. I'm not saying security needs to be cheap.
Right.
It certainly needs to be cost effective, not necessarily cheap. And I get it. I've said this many times before. I said, put it on a shirt. People know the price of everything, but the value of nothing. I get it. I understand that. I'm not here to say SIEM suck because it costs money, but they're not necessarily cost effective. And the problem is that right now, because of the costing issue, SIEMs traditionally become a little bit of an elitist or a very specialized product. For me, a SIEM has to become a dashboard that anyone and everyone in the company that matters can look at and draw some intelligence from.
Right.
Whether that person is a director of HR, whether that person is a director of facilities, I don't care. But there's something about the SIEM that gives people some intelligence. Now, I understand that we have specialist roles in security and all of those things, and we teach all of that stuff, and we have to specialize because we got to drill deeper. But I do feel that we're at a point where A, it costs a lot, making it a little bit inaccessible, not necessarily cost effective. But B, because of its costing, it's become such a specialized product that A, standardizations may not exist. You may always run into protocol misconfigurations and all of that fun stuff. But it's not a tool that everyone that matters can look at and draw intelligence from. It becomes making more work to now create dashboards and reportings and all of those other things, which again keeps people like me in a job because that's what I specialize in. But at the same time, it would be nice if the SIEM could be a little cost effective, but also less sucky if it was more accessible from an intelligence gathering and a sharing perspective.
I think that's a fantastic perspective, and really hits at, I think, some of the issues that I personally have with
Yeah.
SIM as a whole, right? I think if you look at all the other departments within an organization, they all have an operating system that they utilize, right? So like HR has Workday, and manufacturing has SAP, and finance has whatever it is that finance uses, and Excel maybe.
Excel.
Right? But security really doesn't have that, and SIM has always been promised to be that. But I think, to your point, there's this there's this elitist nature to it, this like return on investment that needs to be gained at this massive level, that keeps it from being approachable in a way that is that enables the security department to communicate effectively, and to even know what they're trying to obtain effectively. That got off the rails in my brain. I have so much I want to say on that, but the timer's counting down over here, and it turned yellow, and it lost my train of thought.
Well, can I jump in for a second?
Please.
Because I just have to. I have an itch. I got to respond to that. Look, I think you're straight up in what you just said, and bang on. I agree. Look, you got to understand another thing about this is that right now, hey, I know I'm not allowed to swear on this show, so I won't.
Please
have
swear.
to myself.
Go for it. You can do whatever you want.
No, but yeah, folks, listen. Here's a fucking problem. All right, for someone like me, all right, last week I had an existential crisis, because when I hear that the CISO from SolarWinds has now been charged, and I hear all of these stories now about the amount of liability that I have to take on, when I look at a SIEM and I go, well, we missed certain things, or we didn't capture certain things, but you've put all this brain trust in my team, and it's such a specialized product that only a few of us get to look at it and understand it. Look, I want to share a little bit of that liability.
Yeah.
Not only do I want to build trust that, hey, I gave you access as well, you should be watching too, but I also want to share in a little bit of the responsibility. We always beat our chest about, hey, you know what? Security is everybody's responsibility. Your responsibility, my responsibility, the door's responsibility. Yeah, but then suddenly the SIEM, which is such an important tool where we have to peer into what's going on into our core assets and our network, suddenly that becomes a very elitist and evasive tool. That's the problem, right? You need to make it into a way where, yes, we're capturing specialist logs. There are things that may not necessarily make sense to somebody who doesn't understand that, but it's got to be at a point where there have to be certain features within it that I can share across the board, so I can have more eyes on deck, more hands on deck. And I think that's why when you say it sucks, it doesn't suck because it doesn't have utility. It sucks because it's just limited in terms of who can use it.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary of, I think, a lot of our feelings, actually just living in the world and watching. Abe and I have a unique point of view where we both are responsible for revenue, right, to some extent, and yet also technical, right? And like, I know what it takes to sit down and implement Splunk from the beginning. and it's there's a cognitive dissonance that exists there that I think you've pinpointed exactly correctly. Shifting gears a little bit, and then I think I want to come back to this perspective that you've gained, but give us a little bit of background into how you got here, how you got to that perspective. I know Randy has talked about, you did an excellent keynote at Greylog Go. He has talked about posting that along with this to give some people some of that background. But let's dive into more of the direct security path that you took into, hey, now you're not only interested in cyber, but you're teaching it, and you've gained this perspective of kind of the everyman security person, I would say. How do we make this accessible to the world so that we can do a better job of stopping threats as a community and not as individual organizations?
A wise individual once said, if you don't know where you're going, everywhere will get you there. And that's pretty much it, bro. Like, I kind of didn't know where I was going. I mean, like I said in my keynote, right? Like, got to Canada, the whole story of getting stopped at the airport and all of that fun stuff. Advice from my mom, don't end up on the Jerry Springer show, all of those things. But I honestly didn't know where I was going. But, I'll tell you that there were two pivotal moments besides, and anybody that gets to hear the keynote, go ahead, was It was good fun. I assure you, I was not under any alcoholic beverage at that time. I was just having fun. And I gotta admit, I've done this a lot. That crew there was intimate, but good. They were engaged. And it makes it a lot of it makes it easier when you're on stage. You can just flow with it. But there are two pivotal moments, right? The first, I would say, and to just rephrase the question a little bit, the first one that I would say is how I got into it from a corporate perspective and as a career. And this was when I had the opportunity. I was working at Orion, and we had hired a CISO. I had a bit of a role to play in that. Some of you may have met him before, Farouk Nair. We had a couple of other leading CISOs at different Ontario universities and colleges, like Luc Roy. For those that don't know, Orion sort of provides the telecom network for the universities and colleges. We had Luc Roy from Laurentian University. We had Alistair McLeod from OCAT. So sort of the big names in the CIO, CISO space. And we proposed this concept called a shared CISO. And this was coming because of, ironically, a very sucky thing, which was cost to hire an independent CISO for each institution. But also we realized very quickly that you can take CISO and turn CISO into a service. And for me, that was a very pivotal moment pedagogically, because normally working both on the software side and the network side, we always think of hardware and tools. And suddenly I got this opportunity to look at governance, compliance, auditing, risk assessment, and intelligence in one individual and making that into a shared service. Suddenly you realize that there were all these frameworks that we could align to. And that's when I sort of got into it from a corporate perspective, where I thought, here's a bunch of universities and colleges that want to tap into a shared CISO. How do I scale this? And now suddenly you're realizing that I'm doing a risk assessment for one institution. How can I do that and at the same time also support 5 others and allow them to collaborate together? That was my corporate introduction into security. And that's the moment when I realized this is a space that I can go deeper into. I've said this repeatedly. Anyone can technically do something in security, but you kind of have to find those areas where you can play well, which takes me to my second point. And that was, I realized very quickly as I was talking to people about what I did. By 2017, I was getting quite a lot of panel opportunities, speaking opportunities, starting off on my PhDs as well. And I started to now have to go through this process of explaining to people what security is. And very quickly, that was the moment when I realized a good technologist is a very, very good storyteller. The CISO as a storyteller, the security practitioner as a storyteller. And then I realized the parallels right there. We have this in the social sciences and in general at universities and colleges. We have this new specialist role that's come up of a knowledge mobilizer or a knowledge translator. And David Phipps at York University was one of the pioneers of this concept. Back in 2011, came up with this idea of teams should have a knowledge mobilization coordinator or a knowledge translator. And really your role is to take certain technical concepts and make them understandable in different pedagogies and different techniques, in different languages in some cases, to other departments and other teams. And that's what I found my strengths in. Imagine my first keynote on security was with Dr. Anna Hudson, the Mobilizing Inuit Cultural Heritage program, where I got to keynote about what are some of the security threats that Inuit artists working out of Nunavut might face. And there is a technology debt there. There is a technology deficit there, starting with infrastructure alone and internet. But I got to talk about some very basic things and then translating it into what this could mean for artists. Those were the two pivotal moments for me. When I understood I get the technicals and I can bring people around that pretty well, but I can also translate what's happening in the security world. Those two moments came together for me when I realized this is the path that I genuinely want to go down. And then, you know what? I met this person named Randy. And then he met me and said, Ali, and he guided me. And here I am in front of you.
That's
Glad I could help.
That's awesome. I joke a lot about being a nerd that happens to be able to talk to people, and that's how I've gotten to where I am. And that there aren't, and Abe is one of them too, and there are not many of us, right? But I think that you make a really good point in that one of the things that I know that we see and we're looking at from the solution engineering perspective within Greylog is I need so many more perspectives than I once needed in order to effectively communicate the security story to a variety of people, right? No longer is a security decision made simply by the nerds, right? Like we're no longer the no hammer, right?
Hmm.
as I once was passionately called at one point in my career. And we are now a business enablement device in which we have to be able to communicate to people within HR, within accounting, within manufacturing, and that requires a variety of backgrounds. It requires a variety of perspectives
Mhm.
that aren't all just like the people that grew up doing illegal things on the internet, right? Like,
Hey.
There. There. You listened to the keynote.
I, yeah, might have also
Yeah.
lived that part of the keynote.
I'm going to remind you
Can I
guys this
sell
is
anything to you?
this is being recorded, so be careful what
Oh,
you
yeah.
say.
Back to the topic.
Statute of limitations is over. It's fine. It's good. We're beyond that. I think this storytelling concept is really interesting. How are you seeing the storytelling that you're discussing? Like, how are you seeing that we actually take that and push it into the security community and get the security community that historically has been kind of a little bit closed off to outsiders in general, those that aren't nerds, and how do we get them to embrace that side of things?
Yeah, fair question. Look, I'm going to make two very important points, or at least for me, right? I've always believed that, and again, I'll speak from the area that I have. Look, we see a lot of talk right now about having financial literacy courses brought into K-12 and all of those areas. I agree with that 100%. I don't know what the banks would say, but that's a separate discussion altogether. Oh shit, my mortgage renews in a year. Please, the bank that heard that, please, I love you. Now, with regards to security and communications, the first thing that I've been an advocate for, every freaking discipline on campus better have a mandatory security course. And no, I'm not talking about did you do an awareness training? Like, hey, this is a phishing email. Don't click it. Good. Yay. You didn't click it. Yay. You saved the universe. No. I'm talking about a practical course where we put you through the basics, but then you actually do case studies and you present how you would defend against something. Just even if it's not technical, operationally alone. I think these are super important. Province of Ontario 2 weeks ago did and shout out to you folks with the CTF that you have. I can't wait to run it whenever we get the opportunity to. Province of Ontario did a non-technical hackathon 2 weeks ago. And it was centered around a mythical university that's going through an LMS potential breach. And at least 40 students there were in policy management. The team that won had 3 people in policy management. That's what I'm talking about.
Wow.
You need to have these courses introduced into other programs, because even if the technical folks, look, not everybody's going to be great in everything. Do we need nerds who sit and write code, review code, use a little bit of autopilot, but then are not just coders, are programmers and can integrate code well, understand CI/CD pipelines? Yeah, we do. We love them because these applications still need that intelligence, still need that context. But if you can get folks in policy management, you can get folks in psychology, so on and so forth, interested in security, I think you'll find a lot of those gaps that we need in terms of communications getting filled. So number one, I'm a big fan of making sure that we have a security course in each and every degree, diploma that we're offering, and it should be of different variances. The second thing, though, which I emphasize a great deal, is communications now goes through what we like to call a multimodality. Once upon a time, it was there's a message that's issued, it's a memo, it's a note, someone reads it, there's no interaction with that, end of story. It comes from IT, hey, we're doing a systems outage, bye, don't be online this time, or you won't have access to the system, see ya. Now we're in this mode where you can have remote, you can have in person, but you can have interactivity between security, between IT, and the rest of the teams. We've got to capitalize on that. I do believe, now everybody, for example, there have been a lot of things in the news lately about certain CISOs that have left, the whole story about Clorox, for example, and all those things. But what was one of the things that someone said with regards to the CISO that left Clorox? Is that one of their legacies that they left behind was, I think it was called lunch with the security leader or lunch with the security member. These little things where you can create programs where security folks can engage in conversation and there's a two-way street of interactivity, whether that is your intranet has been set up in a way where people can ask questions, whether you've developed an interesting hashtag, something. But we have to sort of start to embrace that interactivity between the security team and the rest of the team members that are in an organization. That goes a very, very long way. For a very, very long time, and I've said this repeatedly, we've been seeing, and I don't look at that division between vendors and users. I mean, yeah, sure, maybe legally there's a difference, but we're all in the security game together.
Mm-hmm.
The bad name that we get as security in general is that we seem to commodify and trade in fear. If you do this is going to happen. Or you don't do this, do you know what's going to happen? We need to step away from that dialogue and that discourse. We have to be real in how we communicate, authentic in how we communicate. And while those are good things to start sharing and in reinforcing, some practical steps like lunch with the security team, practical steps like I saw Cyber Toronto, which is a free conference that happens. They just announced for newbies in security an opportunity to come and speak for 5 minutes about something in security. We need to start promoting more and more of that. And that's the only way in which you're going to get a little bit of more engaged communications and more enhanced communications between security teams and those that really depend on us to keep their environment secure.
Yeah, I think security is made up of humans, right? And we've like tried to make it this,
Yep.
we're a machine and you need to do what we say or you're going to have a bad time. But
Yeah.
we can see in the world around us that people perceive risk most often when that risk happens to them, right? Like people drive much more carefully when they've gotten in a car accident, right? Like and a lot of people need to learn by doing, right? People need to learn by experiencing. And so we can shout from mountaintops like don't click on
Yep.
that link or whatever, but until they do and they experience what happens, that often is not the most effective way to communicate. And we see that, wherever we are. I mean, we see it with vendors that are trying to use fear and trying to convince a CISO who literally deals in risk all day that this risk is the worst. And really, it's just people. People are what are going to make this organization secure. Yeah, I mean that one of my least favorite things that I hear on a regular basis is people are the biggest risk to my environment. They're also your greatest asset, right?
Yeah.
Like these are the people that will make or break your environment.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in very, very quickly with it, and I'll add one little example is, look, one of the things that from a security perspective, why communications I feel is essential, is also understand that, we talk about, right, two types of organizations, those that have been breached and those that just don't know it. Look, I think, I forget his last name, but Mike Mello, CISO of Life Labs, in an interview recently said something really profound. He said, if I'm going to be breached, I'm going to be breached. Going to happen.
Yeah.
What I need to know is to decide and explain to the team what's the impact of what's happened and how can we mitigate that impact to a degree. It's going to happen. And I think while that sounds like a very simple sentence to say, it's also assuming a little bit of ownership to say, look, as the security team, we're not omnipotent. As much as Randy may call me Your Highness Ali, I'm not omnipotent, right? Or Your Holiness. There is this issue. Things are going to happen. And we need to know how to communicate that in a way where we're in it sort of together and there are practices that we have to do. I get appalled when I walk into a team and I see there's a technical incident response plan and only a technical one. So yes, we know which backups we're going to turn on, but the marketing team had absolutely no clue what to respond to or what to put out in messaging. The board of directors had no clue about how to respond to questions that they've suddenly received. And it sort of becomes, it's a security problem. So this is why I keep emphasizing this. That communications piece is so essential. And there are practical exercises that we can do. I cannot underplay how important what you folks are doing is right now. And I'll be very upfront about this. The two of you probably, or the three of you here probably, have been extroverted. You're good with talking to people. You've run CTFs, etc. You've branded yourself to a degree, all right? And you've built a little bit of a confidence. There are other security folks that just with a little bit of communications training, a little bit of branding, a little bit of a look and a feel to how they look online, sending them to panels, sending them to conferences, really does shape up and allow them to engage better. That's why I think anyone who thinks that these kind of sessions is, we're just talking to each other. No, we're encouraging other people to do this as well, because it has a very, very good return on investment. And it should factor in to budgets within a team. It should factor in. I get it. We go for conferences, and normally what we do is we look at what list did we get. Okay, what's the list? A list of 70% of potential customers. That's great. I understand that, and I get from an acquisition perspective that's important. But also from a PD perspective, the people that we sent up to speak, the people that we sent to attend, how did they benefit? And what can we get from that? That's important for me. We train, as I said in my keynote, for consumption, not for engagement. And we need to shift that.
Yeah, I think there was an interesting. So I have it was a double major between, or I guess I have a major in computer information systems, which is a business degree, and a minor in computer science. Out of every single one of my computer science courses, there was one presentation, one group project, one presentation, right?
Good.
And then when I look at my CIS degree, also computer focused, also relatively technical, every single class I took had group projects, presentations, things where you had to be communicating what you were doing and what the outcome of it was. And it's interesting to now see in the vendor space, now looking to hire, we have these cybersecurity accelerators, we have these cybersecurity degree programs, things like that don't incorporate how to communicate, how to work in a team, how to be a part of an organization. And to your point, I think that's really one of the largest struggles we have in the industry right now. By far, I think it's huge.
I agree. There's a lot more that I could add to that, but I think you summarized it pretty well there, Captain. I'm holding you, Minister of Education.
No, please don't. But I do want to give Abe a chance to talk, because I've fully taken all of the questions in this.
You've done really well. You read all my notes. You cheated successfully.
I'm glad you didn't make me give the definition, because I think I just gave the definition right there, just cheating away.
I kind of want to pry apart a little bit more on what you've got going forward, Ali. I see a lot of, I think we're identifying in different words in all of our experiences. So Randy on the customer facing prospect side, Joe on the solution side, me on the service side, and you in education and cyber executive side are all kind of coming up to the same sort of problem. And that is the story in the middle between the engagement, not the consumption, but the engagement, as you said, seems to be the biggest gap. And so when you're talking about your answer to why does SIEM suck, it's I can't hand this to somebody in a different department. I can't hand this to custodial services and have them glean information from my SIEM dashboard. I can't hand this to finance and have them glean information from. And why is because the technical people, those that know our CI/CD pipelines. He's right. We love you, by the way, including my engineers. We love you. Including those people. What do I tell them to put on that chart? What do I tell them to score, and how do they score it to get onto that graph? How do I get that story in a way that's not only consumable, but consumable to a broad audience? And I think that's a lot of the going forward part. And I think that's one of the biggest struggles. And I think when you couple that up, security specifically, with the fact that, and this is the third time I've said this in my third thing in my calendar today, but the couple that up with security and risk management as a whole is ultimately about trying to prove a negative, and a lot of times trying to financially prove a negative, right? I spent $1 million on my SIM. Thank you, by the way. And I spent $1 million. What did I get out of that, right? And so building that scorecard, at the end of the day, if you don't have that story, you don't have that scorecard, you're asking me, how many times did you not get stepped on by Godzilla today, right? And so 4, 11?
The example... Yeah, the example I like to use is if I knew how many heart attacks I would avoid by eating better and exercising, my habits would probably be different.
Yeah. Proving the negative, exactly. How do I prove that Santa isn't in the room with me? And so it's interesting, and I think that story gap is something that you are trying to address, and you do a lot of what you do, I think, is around addressing that story gap, including the cybersecurity. But what else have you got on the go from some of that? What are some of the other things that you've got coming down the pipe from that?
So there's two things that I want to comment on, and I think you hit it spot on when it comes to what are we trying to work towards now, which is to make these themes a little more accessible, to make it more contextualized. But I recognize that we don't suck for a lack of trying.
Mhm.
And I lump myself into the theme community because we don't suck for lack of trying. It genuinely is difficult to see how you can contextualize this and make this general enough that every department can glean some piece of data out of it. The first thing for me, from an executive perspective, why it's difficult is, call me an alarmist for doing this, but I don't know who to trust necessarily. I genuinely have to look at things such as how long has somebody been in the company? Are there any performance issues, so on and so forth? And there are policy issues around HR sharing that information with me as well, because why should HR trust me? If I'm going to give so much optic into an organization, A, there's a trust that's vested in me, but B, there's also, if I share this information with the director of finance, if I give more access to this to the director of marketing, how can I trust them to act in one particular way or the other? And if they end up leaving the company, there are secrets in that, there's intelligence in that can leave the door. So there is, and believe you me, with the recent, with the situation with the Uber CSO, with the situation with the SolarWinds CISO, I think these questions are left, right, and center for a lot of executives in terms of how do you establish that trust? And it's a genuine question, not something philosophical. It's a genuine question. How much is too much to share and with whom, right? You don't share the financial data with everyone. You share it at a high level. What is that high level in security, and is that high level okay enough? So that's the first issue which you deal with from an operational perspective and truly from a trust perspective. The second thing really comes down to the SIEM environment is competitive. Everyone at the end of the day has to sell. Cost that it takes to integrate and deploy a new feature, then test it to see if it's effective, etc. It's not that easy. And when you've got, congrats, you guys have raised funds as well, which is a testimony to your progress. But at the end of the day, when you've raised monies and you have shareholders and stakeholders to pay back to, how long will it take to evolve into that advanced level of a SIEM and that more accessible level of a SIEM? Is there are other forces besides technicalities. There are financial and economic issues that come into that picture as well. So we suck, but suck for a reason. And it can only get better if teams have a little bit of more time, have a little bit of more context and more communication. And there are steps to follow on that front. So definitely a conversation for another time, maybe even a keynote. But in terms of what do I have? Justine from Greylog, hi. It's your night release for next year. Now, what do I have going forward? I'm going to speak from the heart. I have made a commitment that after the December, when we get to the Christmas holidays, it's time as a security individual to take care of my mental health. I'll be very brutal and honest with you. And one of the reasons I joined this show is primarily because Randy asked me, and Abe, I've met you and folks have met you, but Randy, because I've had the opportunity to be quite open with him on many things, right? Forget the sales aspect, right? Yeah, I've purchased from Randy before and purchased with him in trust and built good products and good processes through it. But the reality is that in this field, you're constantly on edge. In some of the consulting gigs that I have, I can tell you that Moneris got hit and suddenly I see 10 messages coming in telling me, oh, how are we protected against that? You're constantly on edge. And there's got to be a way in which I can mediate this a little bit better. I genuinely have an issue, and that is instantaneity with responses. And I'll tell you where this came from. I got into this sector, and I'll speak very openly. 24, 25, I was the youngest person in the executive room. I saw the tensions at the executive table. The youngest person there, non-white. Everybody else, 20 years of experience, a particular ethnic group. I felt like I always had to do a little bit more to prove myself, that imposter syndrome. And that stayed with me. Even though I've won accolades, even though I've got nominations and I've got great reviews, I felt like I always have to go that step above. Now, even when I sit in an executive spot, I see a message in one of the groups, I want to respond right away. And I realized that is chewing away at my mental health. The idea is not to suddenly say, no, I'm not going to respond. The idea is to build better processes. And the idea might be to build better updates, better processes to receive complaints, receive issues, so on and so forth. So I really want to work on my mental health, not from a therapeutic side alone, but from a process side, because I feel that will help overall. And I encourage folks, a time comes in your career when you can invest in a coach and some support, do it. It is worth it. And go to conferences where you can meet certain people that will be willing to assist you. So that's number one on my list going into 2024. The second thing, which I'm going to be working on very closely, is more gamification of tabletop exercises. I had the opportunity, and again, I'm not saying this because he's here. I'm saying this because he was one of my go-to people and still is. I, late in 2021, worked with a couple of folks to develop a little bit of a Dungeons and Dragons like tabletop exercise. I was still very raw at it. And I played it once and I got feedback. Practice, got better and better and better. And I do get a lot of requests to run these games, but now I want to start bringing in other concepts into it. For example, recently I introduced the idea of Monopoly money to buy services during the game. And that was interesting because it now brings in a financial and a fiscal management into how you deal with the response. So I'm going to start to look at other types of games that I can create from a security perspective. And I want to focus on the non-technical side, and I want to focus on the privacy side. I feel like these are super important. And a shout out to Cat Code all the way in Waterloo, because she was one of those individuals that encouraged me to go down this path, but also start taking privacy seriously in these games. That's a second piece that I want to bring into this. The third, and this is extremely, extremely important for me. I want to take some time, hopefully in the summer of 2024, to go back to Nunavut and to go to all the hamlets in Nunavut. Pangnirtung, Rankin Inlet, Arviat. Few people know this, but when I did field work in Nunavut in 2014, it changed my life forever. I couldn't believe that I was in Canada. All right. I mean, you go into the Frobisher Inn and normally you see, hey, if you want to reuse your towel, hang it here. You see a sign that says, please conserve bandwidth. I couldn't believe that I was in Canada when I saw this. The North, especially our Inuit communities, have consistently been used as opportunities to sell a couple of products, get a couple of videos out, and that's about it. There's so much talent there. So much talent. Inuit ways of thinking, traditional ways of thinking, also on the psychology of attackers are things we can learn from. My goal for 2024, honestly, folks, is to teach a course at Nunavut Arctic College and to travel across Nunavut and spend some time doing cyber awareness training, trying to create more literature that will relate to the communities over there, and thanking the Inuit communities and the traditional owners of this land for giving us this opportunity. That's what I want to do. Financially, I do well, and I'm grateful to the universe that I'm good on that side, and I think I'll continue to. But these are the three important objectives for me going into 2024. And then, of course, I also want to continue to be just as awesome as Randy and the rest. That's a tough one, but I'm going to try.
It's really hard to be as awesome as Randy is.
It's very
I
hard.
know. Look at that shirt.
I
Look
know.
at all the plants behind him.
I
Then there's
know.
a skull too. Santa
Yeah,
Muerte vibes. Good on you.
Can you imagine, like, you work with him intermittently. I literally am his counterpart. And I have my like blank walls behind me and have to own up to this. I don't know. It's tough. But I want to take what you've said kind of piece by piece, because I think
Sure.
I think that each are really important pieces to the cybersecurity world that we live in today. One is around mental health. I think we have a massive crisis within cybersecurity as a whole. Vendor side, user side, people trying to get into it side, all of it. There is so much stress built up around what we're doing that I think being open and honest about our mental health journeys that we're all on, I think is important. And I think it's important to some of what you said earlier as well, of just humanizing the cybersecurity organization within a company, right? I think we often get we often get put into this like box of, well, you're just a bunch of nerds and you're over here and you're fine. Like you're doing what you love. And yes, I do what I love every single day, but the pressure, to your point, right? We see it, we feel it from a different angle being a vendor, but still, you see Moneris got attacked. Well, now I've got, what do we do? Like, I've got product, I've got sales breathing down my neck. Well, what do we do to prevent something like this? How can I use this as ambulance chasing fodder and things like
I'll
that?
recall
Like,
that email, Joe.
I think it's great to hear somebody that's in a position like you being open about their mental health, because I know that it's something that I've struggled with, and it's something that I've struggled to be open about because,
Yeah.
like you, I was 25 the first time I was in an executive room, and it's hard to be like, well, I'm struggling. I'm showing up to work every day, but I'm not getting out of bed other than that, like, and that's a difficult place to be. So I appreciate you being open, and I hope that we, as in the group of us here on this call, and then also the community as a whole, can continue to push that into 2024, because I think it is the thing that I think is the biggest threat to our industry as a whole today.
I'll say something to this, and I think it's super important. I'm not going to shy away from it. We know the political circumstances we find ourselves in. I don't think people actually realize how close we are as security executives to everything that's happening on that front too.
Mm.
From a threat intel
Mhm.
perspective, you'd be surprised, and I can't name examples. Security folks face threats, serious threats, personal threats at some points as well. And it happens. If your company is believed to be affiliated with the one particular ideology over the other, if you are seen to be working in one circumstance, you face threats. And it happens. And the world can be a nasty place in that regard. I'm not taking sides, but here in Toronto, we saw some pretty nasty attacks against Indigo, right?
Mm.
And we've seen some things happen which, realize something, right? If you're the CISO in that environment, you're under that threat. You're feeling that cloud. And even when you go threat hunting, you'll see threats left behind. You'd be surprised how many profile cards of ours exist everywhere.
Mm.
And it's a stressful position to be in, especially if you're then in a minority group, so on and so forth. And security, just like in policing or whatever else have you, there's threats everywhere. There's safety concerns that we assume in this role. And I guarantee you that even if a CISO hasn't thought about it, it's there. And it's things that like these that we have to start taking care of ourselves around. I feel for, I get it. I've been in those positions. A breach has happened. Now the vendor community comes aggressively. Yeah, we can save you. We can save this. We can save that. For a moment, just sit on this side of the fence. Yeah, sure. Maybe I'm at 200K, 250, 300, whatever that is. That's great. But just for a moment, also understand what we're going through at this moment, right? I think that's super important. And I think CISOs need to be given more space to have these discussions. The bravado that comes, especially being a male CISO, we need to bring that down a little bit and stop pumping the masculinity alone. We need to have this conversation because I think it's super, super important. And I'll tell you a story. Canadian Women in Cyber 2023, I had the opportunity to interview an individual not in the space of security, who was a good friend, Kimberly Black, who in the Durham region during COVID was going for a walk and got assaulted and came back literally from death and survived, got assaulted pretty badly. I had the opportunity to interview her at the gala night. Some folks loved it. Some folks wished that I had given a trigger warning. But at the end of the day, after taking a lot of feedback from major CISOs like Octavia Howell, George Alcura, and so on and so forth, I appreciated the one thing that they told me is like, we appreciate you being human about our experiences in security and humanizing it and feeling comfortable to talk in this way because we need to. So that's my goal. That's my objective.
100%. No, I think that's fantastic. I think that rolls us right into kind of the second point that you made around gamification, which is, I think we see it on our side there's this, we've installed a sim, we've installed this thing that's going to start suddenly blinking lights at you, right? But what do you do with it? And how do I educate someone that is an IT admin that has now suddenly been tasked with security, or is a front desk person that's now suddenly been tasked with security, right? And it's something that we struggle with even inside of our own organization. Of we made this switch from being a log management to a security company. Abe and
Yeah.
I are great because we've sat in that seat and we've we've lived that life. But how do I communicate that to someone who's who came from like a recruiting background? Shout out to Benedict,
Yeah.
and convince him of security things. And so I'd be really interested to get your perspective on, yeah, we talked about gamification of instant response, but are there ways that we can even gamify the learning that you kind of brought up earlier of these, low level courses,
Yeah.
and how can we make security more approachable and easier to follow through gamification as a whole?
I think it's important that, without sounding academic about it, it is important that we define gamification. And the idea is not that gamification is, all right, we've made some characters, now you play as characters in a particular role. Gamification has to be integrated into the overall, if I talk from an academic standpoint, into the overall system, right? I do believe that our learning management systems, our intranets, all give us an opportunity to create different characters, but also to ingrain competitions, to ingrain awards, to ingrain certain scenarios within the day-to-day affairs of the organization. So using things like SharePoint, using things like your intranet to run certain campaigns, I think is important, and that's part of the gamification journey. But there are two other things that I'm going to emphasize. To have good gamification, especially in real time, you need to have good and very effective game hosts,
Mm.
and there's training that goes into it. One of my goals is to watch more of Dungeons and Dragons and participate as well. You have to know how to go with it, right? As a good game host, you can have all the prompts that you want and whatever else have you, but you've got to be quick on your feet, and you've got to know how to assume different characters, chameleon-like, very quickly. So you got to train to be a good game host. There's no two ways about it. You got to go and you got to have some role models and you got to follow them. The second thing that I really think would be cool is to start to create almost like an esports vibe to all of this, right? We have CTFs. You folks have a brilliant one.
Yeah.
But again, it's played and it's done. Now, we've heard of Cyber Olympics, which also has a little bit of an esports component to it. I think we need to bring in more of that, right? You have NBA game competitions, which people really prep for, and universities take great pride in saying, hey, we came second or we came third or whatever have you. I had the opportunity 2 years ago to watch University of Canada West, which is in Vancouver, a private university, do really well in the NBA games, and it was very well received. We need to bring in something of that nature in order to sort of push towards this element of gamification. Again, we have to be careful, security and the insider threats and all of those things, a wider conversation. But for me, the becoming a better game host and creating a bit of an esports-like culture around this are the steps that I will probably be focusing on quite a bit.
Awesome.
That is awesome.
That's great. Abe, I think you have our last question before the lightning round.
I do. I did.
There's a lightning
There's a
round?
lightning round.
Oh,
There's
man.
always a lightning
There's a
round.
game, Ali. That's how we work.
All right.
No, I kind of wanted to wrap up just because I know we all asked you, we hit you pretty hard with a handful of questions there, and I did want to kind of summarize it, and because I think your summarization is really powerful in this, and that was bring the conversation to a wider audience. So when we find ourselves, we have these gaps in telling the stories of our security consoles or our security as a whole, get these gaps in building our programs and broadening the audience of who can contribute to those gaps. Basically the core of what you're saying. It makes sense as a professional educator, as a professional storyteller, and someone whose goals are to go to remote places. We'll have a pretty international audience, so not everyone knows. The places that Ali were listing are far from everything ever, and Canada's pretty remote, so that's a big scale. And so he's talking about going to some really interesting places, some really, really remote cultures, and then also mixing that in with the mental health. But the overall story being, the more people we can bring into the conversation, the better value we're going to have all the way around, and then making that part of the ongoing process. And I wanted to summarize that because I think that is awesome. That's powerful. That's a lot of information in a thing. So I like that. Now I'm stuttering on words. All right, now we'll move on to the hard shift to the next step, and that is, if you have advice for people we're Vendor Podcast, you have advice that you want to really shout out with the timer going. I'll warn you on that one. To vendors in the security space, what's your biggest advice to those of us in the community that sell cybersecurity?
You're not selling, you're building relationships, period. And the reason I say this is because, again, there's a difference between having a customer and having a relationship. A customer buys once, never comes back. A relationship, we turn to you for advice. We turn to you for feedback. A good example of this is Randy. Me and him, we never spoke products until one day I realized, hey, I need something. And he had something for me. Went through a process. Process was done, due diligence was done, but we had that relationship and that worked out very well. Build relationships, don't build customers.
I think that's beautiful.
That is
That's
beautiful.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
concise.
if I had to like sum up my, hey, you're brand new to being an SE, what should you be doing? It's it's right there. That's it.
Great.
Yeah, 100%. Randy, over to you, man.
All right. Now, for the segment that my Spotify podcast analytics dashboard is described as subscription reducing, the lightning round.
Let's go.
There will be 90 seconds on the clock. Answer
Sure.
each question as quickly and concisely as possible, because we will not be keeping score and cash prizes will not be rewarded.
All right.
Are you ready?
Always.
Star Wars, Star Trek, or Doctor Who?
None of them. How have you folks forgotten that I'm all about Bollywood? Yeah, Amitabh Bachchan or Shah Rukh Khan in any of those. I'm not interested. Nah.
Okay. What is your favorite or least favorite acronym?
Oh my God, you're reminding me of what I did at the keynote when I the acronym for Pakistan International Airlines, and I
Yes.
converted it into perhaps I'll arrive. So actually, I like and I like the idea of a SOC, and the acronym SOC, and why is I remember Cat Code once used a line and said, "Let's put a SOC in it." And that's what Matt's gonna get with me, right? So that those are one of the acronyms in security where I go, let's put a SOC in it. It means a lot of different things. But
Nice.
I do like that acronym quite a bit.
Nice. And this one's just for you. Tandoori chicken, butter chicken, or lamb vindaloo?
Now, if you mix the three of them together, then we're confident
Oh,
cooking with
man.
yeah. But you know what? It has to be butter chicken. But you know what? Tandoori chicken. Yeah, there's this place in Mississauga, which just I can't remember the name actually, but it was just out of this world. But yes, either let's mix the three of them together, or if I had to pick one, then we'll stick with butter chicken for the win.
Nice. And on that note, that is lightning round.
That was my favorite definition of concise. We got like 3 of them.
That was great.
Good time.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
That was
Nice.
fantastic. No, thank you so much, Ali. This has been absolutely fantastic and a great conversation from a totally different perspective than I think we've had in the past, but also one that I think we're all constantly thinking of, but never necessarily saying out loud. So thank you. Thank you so much. And
Cool.
yeah, if you have anywhere that you want to shout out that people can find you, this is the time. Otherwise, we'll add it to the podcast description later.
Listen, I'll just say one thing. Look, I've always maintained this, that a true measure of people's character is not how much they earn, do they pray, do they give charity. It really comes down to how they treat other people. Thank you for not just respecting my time, but also giving me a break in my day where I can just be me and go back to security. But thank you for treating me with respect, respecting my time, giving me interesting questions, and just giving me a laugh at lunchtime. It's very important. And I truly, truly appreciate the preparation that went into this. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks
100%.
for joining us.
You're welcome. Anytime we will have you back. This is actually just going to be an Ali focused podcast from now on.
Right. Yeah.
I apologize.
Yeah.
We had a guest for next week, but not anymore.
Well, I'm trying to determine which host he's replacing.
You know, Randy, when you can't think of who they're going to replace, you often have to look at yourself.
Ouch, that backfired quickly.
Well done, Joe.
Quickly.
Good point. Very good point.
Very fair.
I don't think we could get Ali to say as little as I say during an episode.
Ooh.
Very fair. All right. Thank you everyone for listening. Please come back next time. That's how we're going to close it. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks.